This is the Ego Shop Vac, and it's made for a workshop, but I would never buy one for my workshop. You might. But I do use it as a household vac, and it's the best one I've ever had. Let's get into it. Now, before we start, I'm not going to get into a lot about this vacuum like a review. Okay, there are plenty of videos on that. I'll just why would I want this as a home vacuum cleaner? If you've ever tried to compare vacuum cleaners, you probably noticed every brand gives you a different spec range for cubic feet per minute, CFM, suction, volts, amps, and really none of them tell the whole story of what's going on. The actual number that matters the most is something called Airwatts. Okay, so what are we talking here? Airwatts. Airwatts is the cubic feet per minute times the inches of water lift that you get with some kind of suction device. And the 8.5 is a constant they've worked out to sort of generalize it for all units. So whether you're talking about different types of machinery, whether you're talking about vacuum cleaners, that 8.5 puts it all on a level playing field. And the 8.5, has to do with pressure that's converted from inches of water to pounds per square foot. The flow is converted to cubic feet per minute, and they take into consideration gravity and density constants, and it's basically a flow dynamics thing. And that 8.5 number puts everything on a level playing field. In the end, the Airwatts calculation sort of like just gives you the amount of pulling force at the end of the nozzle without all of the other stuff calculated in. So it kind of eliminates all of that other stuff that's in the vacuum cleaner, like any kind of, barriers and filters and turbines and things like that. Airwatts is basically a measure of how much real pickup power makes it all the way to the floor after the air travels through all the hoses and the filters and the whole vacuum system. For example, little cordless stick vacs almost always fall somewhere between 70 and 120 Airwatts. Big corded shop vacs can get into the 150 to 300 range. Traditional uprights, usually 100 to 200. The Ego cordless shop vac kind of lands in a sweet spot in the middle. It's stronger than most cordless vacuum cleaners and competitive with smaller corded shop vacs. It won't beat a 12 amp corded unit, but in the cordless world, it's one of the strongest options that they have out there, especially for picking up power at the nozzle. Now, when you're comparing vacuums, don't just look at airflow or suction by themselves. Airwatts gives you the most honest picture of how well that will actually clean. So I brought you out to my workshop to sort of start this Airwatts journey. This is a fairly large shop vac, which, this is a Craftsman. People have various versions of something like this. And the reason I bring you out here to see this is because this vacuum cleaner is what I call the rawest version of a vacuum cleaner. A vacuum cleaner has to have an inlet port. The air comes in because there is a fan, basically an air pump, pumping it out the back someplace. And hopefully it brings in the sawdust or whatever you're trying to vacuum with it. But what's different about this vacuum compared to many others that you might see is a shop vac really doesn't have much air restriction or airflow restrictions. It has a pleated cloth filter with no HEPA filter, nothing else. I mean, you have to have some kind of filter because if you didn't, the sawdust would come in one end and go out the other. So you have to stop it. It is about 5 microns that it will stop, which is sawdust. It doesn't stop fine dust at all. The hose on here is about 2.5 inches in diameter. And the only other restriction besides there being a filter that the air has to go through first is the hose is ribbed, so it's not smooth inside. And the reason they do that is because if you didn't, it might collapse. And to stop it from collapsing, you can either make the hose really thick, which would not make it very flexible, or you make it ribbed. And sometimes they have a wire ribbing inside to give it some extra strength. So, rawest in the way that this is an 11 amp motor, which is pretty powerful. It really winds up. There's not much in the way of filters in it. And the air comes in, the air goes out, in its kind of purest form. If you were to take the filter out completely, it would be pure as far as the Airwatts are concerned, pretty much, except for the restriction on the hose. So I wanted to show you this because now I want to show you something that's on a higher end scale as far as Airwatt efficiency. This is my table saw. It's a cabinet saw. Sawdust drops down into here and is funneled out of it. The back side, there's an opening that goes out through that hose on the ground. That hose is 4 inches in diameter. It has a wire ribbing through it to keep it from collapsing. And in this case, it goes down into the floor. So let's go down and see where it goes. My workshop is upstairs in a garrison area over the garage. And in the garage, I have this dust collector. Now, something that gives away the possible Airwatts of this is the size of the hose. It's 4 inches in diameter. It's got a 2 horsepower motor that is about 15 amps. Now, when I turn this on, it draws air in from upstairs, and the unit that drives it, the fan, is down in there, and it's pretty big. So it's capable of moving a lot of air, a lot of CFM. And the restrictions on it are not high. Yes, it has this long hose. It is ribbed. It is wire ribbed because if it didn't, it would collapse. That's how powerful it is. And it has this cloth bag. Now, this cloth bag is about will filter out about 5 microns, which is basically sawdust and a little bit of finer dust. But the fine dust that's in the sawdust actually comes out into the air. And there are 2 ways that you can alleviate this. One is to get a filter, and they sell a large pleated filter that gets things down to 1 micron, which filters almost all of the fine dust that might come out into the air. Or you can move the dust collector into a place where you don't care if the fine dust gets out into the air. It'll get on my Eagle lawnmower, my Eagle snowblower, and a few other things, but that doesn't really matter to me. So what we've got is a high-powered, high CFM unit with not a whole lot of restrictions. And it probably has very high Airwatts at the nozzle. I'll tell you right now, I'm going in. It's 11 degrees out here, and my hands are just starting to freeze up, just waving them in the air like this. So let's head back in. I'm down here with a vacuum that's really on the other end of the scale, but it's a specialty vacuum. This is an ash vac that I use for my pellet stove. Now, this vacuum is a 6 amp vacuum, so it really winds up. Okay, it produces, a lot of CFM from at the motor, but there are restrictions in it. It has a fiberglass bag that's fire resistant on the inside, filter, a pre-filter, and then there's a fine micron filter. It's about 0.5 microns, which isn't a HEPA filter, but it's enough to filter ash. Now, if anyone uses a small shop vac, kind of like the one we saw out in my shop, but small, usually they'll do that. It's generally not a good idea, because the reason is that those vacs filter sawdust and a little bit of fine dust, but ash is much finer than that. It's not HEPA filter finer. It doesn't reach down to the level of pollen, which is what a HEPA filter can filter, but it's much lower than 1 micron that would filter fine dust in a workshop. So that if you have a small shop vac, you get large particles coming in and stopping, but actually a fair amount of the ash will pass through it. And you can test that by taking a piece of white paper and spreading a thin layer of Vaseline on it and putting it next to the outlet on a small shop vac. And over a short period of time, that will turn black. With this, it does not. Now, why do I go all through that? Well, remember that Airwatts is dependent on the cubic feet per minute that this motor can pull through the hose and the restrictions that are in it. Now, this still has the ribbed hose, which is restrictive a little bit, but it has the standard filter, and then it has the fine micron filter, the 0.5 micron, which really restricts the air. So what this vacuum does, it tries to pull air in as hard as it can with a motor that's really quite big for something this size, or quite powerful for something this size. So it tries to increase the CFM as much as it can, knowing that those cubic feet per minute of air that's coming in the hose is going to be slowed down a lot. So the result is we have a fairly high-powered vacuum that doesn't have a large air watt rating at the end of the hose. So when I vacuum the stove out, it's great for pulling up fine ash. But if I try to vacuum some of the small pellets that I might spill, it does pick them up, but not great. So it's a high-powered vacuum cleaner that, because of the restrictions in filtering to keep the ash from coming out into the room, it has very low air watts at the end of the nozzle. And you'll notice that this hose is about 1 inch across. And what they've done is they've tried to match the reality of how fast air is going to be coming through here to the size of the hose. If this hose were much bigger, you would barely be able to feel air waft into the end of it. If it were smaller, it would go in much faster, but you'd only be able to vacuum tiny areas at a time. So what they do is they carefully match the size of the hose so it's enough to vacuum ash, and also big enough so that you can move it back and forth and get the ash up into the vacuum cleaner without a ton of effort. So this is an example of a specialty vacuum that is fairly high powered, that has fairly low air watt rating on the end of the nozzle. So we'll get to the Ego Vac in a second, which is what this is all about. But we have one more vacuum cleaner to look at to show why they're designed the way they are, and then eventually why the Ego vacuum is designed the way it is. This is your typical inexpensive or less expensive upright vacuum cleaner. They make a dozen models and a dozen, maybe 50 different brands. This one happens to be a Black & Decker. It kind of works okay for a light vacuuming, picks up stuff you might spill, things like that. But the way it's made is there's a motor up here, and there's a place to catch the dust, and there's a floor sweeper at the bottom. And This vacuum cleaner runs on an electric drill battery. This one happens to be 20 volts, which makes it a little more powerful than some of the 18 volt ones. But it's small. So that gives you some idea what this is like. Let's take a look at the power of it. The power of this motor is not that great. I don't know what the current rating on the motor is, but I can tell you from using it, it's not that great. So probably the cubic feet per minute is fairly small. And the restrictions, well, we have this tube which is not ribbed, so that's one good thing. And we have this little cyclone area, which is an attempt to try to collect the dust without letting it out of a bag. So we have a solid plastic thing here, and the dust turns into the cyclone, and hopefully the goal is that the dust settles to the bottom, because it's heavy, as the air keeps going up through. So it's spun to move it to the bottom so the air can go up through. Now, there is a filter up here, but it's a HEPA filter. And the HEPA filter is down to like 0.3 microns, so it's quite restrictive. If you take the HEPA filter out, the Airwatts at the bottom, the apparent movement of air coming in increases greatly. The only thing is, if you do that, a lot of this stuff ends up coming out of the vacuum cleaner. So another giveaway that this vacuum is not that powerful is this. Okay, here I've taken the vacuum apart from the head, and you can see that the opening on here is quite small. It's not that much bigger from the ash vac that I had. And the reason they make this small is they know that no matter how strong they make this, or how least restrictive they make it as far as getting stuff through it, and we know it's not that powerful, and it does have some restrictions with that HEPA filter, they can only make this so big. If they made this a little bit larger, because enlarging it makes a big difference, the air would not come up here that fast, so the Airwatts, the apparent movement of air in here, would be much less. So what they've done is they've made it a certain size, and they've attached it to this. Now let's take a look at what they've done between this and this thing to try to squeeze as much Airwatts out of it as they can. Looking at the area of a circle, the area at the end of this tube for the vacuum cleaner is about 2.2 square inches. Considering the size of this floor attachment, it's about an 1/8 inch off the ground. Calculating the area of that space around that floor attachment comes out to about 2 square inches. So you can see that the area of the slot around the beater brush at the bottom is pretty much equal to the area of the hose going up into the vacuum cleaner. Pretty much matched. And it allows the air to be sucked in with the amount of Airwatts it has, an equal amount that's going to be going up. But it's very, very thin. If you were to raise it another 1/8 inch to 1/4, it would effectively cut the number of Airwatts in half, which would be considerable because it's not that great to begin with. So when you look at your vacuum cleaner, particularly if you have an upright, whether it's one like this or a Dyson, look at the size of the floor unit and then look at how high it is above it. And that will give you some idea of the Airwatts that they're able to waste, sort of, in order to make that beater brush at the bottom and that floor unit to be able to pick up things other than just going up the small hose at a time, to be able to cover a large area. Finally, let's talk about the EcoVac. and why I got it as a household vac. Well, first of all, like I mentioned earlier, it rolls so easily. The wheels are large, they swivel in the front, there are two in the front, two in the back, and they spin very easily. They're not tight on the axle at all. So like I said, when you're rolling along, you just pull on the hose and it just follows you very, very easily. Maybe not as good if you have a household that isn't an open concept and has lots of furniture. It's a little big to move around. Secondly, without the battery, this thing is quite light. It's easy to pick up and just move someplace or move over stairs or whatever. Now, let me take this off. It comes with a 5-amp battery, which slips in here and it's not too heavy. And I use that sometime, but I prefer to use the 12-amp I have. And the reason why is even though it makes it a little heavier, but I really just need to roll this around so that doesn't make that much difference. It's the longevity. Now, this house is not big. It's 1,200 square feet. All hardwood surfaces and open concept. If I want to do a really good job of cleaning, a spring cleaning sort of thing, getting the corners and cracks and everything, and I use the 5-amp battery, I never run a battery completely dead. Okay, when it starts blinking red, it means there's still some power left in there. That's when I stop. So I could have up to 20% power. So let's say I use 4 out of the 5 bars on here. Sometimes I make it come really close depending on how much time I took, but usually it doesn't quite make it. This machine has a motor that spins up very, very fast, as vacuum cleaners do. And so it uses a lot of power. This 12-amp battery is basically 220% more amp hours than the 5-amp. So for a long session, I usually have at least 2 bars left. Most of the time, out of the 5, I've just used 2 bars, which would be equal to almost one of these. So I run my 12-amp batteries in there. The 12-amp batteries came with my 2-stage snowblower that I bought 3 years ago. Now, the important thing, the thing that we've been talking about so much, is Airwatts. This hose isn't too big. It's about the same size, maybe a slightly bit larger than a standard canister vacuum cleaner hose. It's not as large in diameter as my shop vac, but I'm trusting that it's tuned to the power of this thing and the restrictions. Because remember, Airwatts is the cubic feet per minute of air that this thing is capable of doing, basically how powerful the motor is, compared to the length of tube, the ribbing in the tube, and the filters that it has to push that air through. Now, let's take a look at some of those restrictions that are in this particular vacuum cleaner. This thing up, there are 2 things that you pop right here. This is the inside of the machine, and this is one of the bags. And this is a 9-gallon unit with a 9-gallon bag. Very easy to replace, put a new one in. And this bag it's cloth, it's paper, but it feels like cloth, and it almost feels like a Tyvek material, actually. I haven't changed it yet because, the vacuum cleaner's been used in the house for a few months. But when I do have to change it, one thing I am going to do is I am going to slit this on the end, and I am going to empty it out really good, and then I am going to reattach. I'm either going to glue it or staple it. I'm not quite sure yet, but I am going to reattach this and use the bag over again. The bags themselves aren't horribly expensive, but they would be if you use it as a shop vac, because you can do, with a 9-gallon bag, which is bigger than most vacuum cleaners, household, much bigger. You can do quite a bit of vacuuming. And this one's probably about a third or a half full now. But in a shop situation where you're just doing stuff and there's sawdust all over the floor, or you're using it connected to small power tools or whatever, this would fill up quite fast. So if you didn't reuse the bag, you'd be buying a lot of bags. One of the reasons why I don't want to have one as a shop vac. This is the unit that was on here turned upside down. Here's the area where the hose connects and the air comes in. It kind of looks like the motor is right here. There's this cone-shaped thing, and here is the filter. Now, this filter is not a HEPA filter, because HEPA filters are usually just for home vacs. Now, a very, very loose filter, like the one that I had in the big dust collector, will stop sawdust down to about 5 microns, which is, kind of not smaller than sawdust, but it's not fine dust at all. Now, the pleated filters you can put on the large dust collector that I show you will take that 5 micron size particle and filter down to 1 micron. A HEPA filter will filter down to 0.3 microns. From all the information I can gather about this in the research, this looks to be a 0.5 to 1 micron filter. So much better than a bag, but not as good as a HEPA filter, someplace in between. And when you think about it, HEPA filters, which are in most home vacs now, are meant to filter things like pollen. If you have some very, very fine dust, they're not needed. 1 micron is needed. 0.5 would be overkill for that. But they're meant for people who have COPD, or possibly someone who's severely asthmatic in the house, or that just doesn't like pollen in the air for some reason. So this filter will filter some fairly small particles, but not HEPA size, not pollen. And I'm leaving this part in the video to show you how it goes back together. It's really quite easy. This pops up, and this one also pops, and now it's on. Okay, so that's it for as far as the mechanism inside and any restrictions we have to the airflow. This unit has a control panel right here. There's an on switch. There is a stop-start button, so you can still leave it on, but stops and start it. There's a speed control, which does speed 1, 2, and a turbo button. So let me turn this on and show you. On, start, stop, and whatever speed you have it set on, when you stop and start it, that's the speed that it will work. And then let me show you the low speed, then high speed, and then turbo. Low, and I'm going to stop it, and I'm going to turn it off. Now, those things can be controlled with this removable remote control. It slides out. You can stop and start it, and you can turn turbo. You need to turn the machine on here, but you can stop and start it and run turbo. So when you turn it on, it's running at whatever speed you left it, and you can flip turbo on. There's also a light here which lights the wand at the end of it if you wanted to. Now, for reference on how it can be used in a household, I find that almost all the time I'm running it on speed 2. And then once in a while when I get to an area, I might just hit the turbo button on the switch that's on the remote as I'm using it, and then just turn it off afterwards if I should need it. I will tell you that that turbo button, I mean, if you come across a sheet of paper and you really want to suck that sheet of paper up, the turbo button will just about do it. It's very, very powerful. Speed 2 seems like a really good vacuum cleaner. On speed 2, if I go over the rug, it's really hard to push on the rug. If I turn it on turbo on the rug, it sticks to the rug. It's like it was glued there. You can't lift it off. I'll often do the rug on speed 1 or 2, the only rug we have. Now, a few things that I've discovered that make this easier or more applicable to a household use. One of them has to do with the head at the bottom. First of all, let me pull the brush out. Some clips here. Okay. The brush, even when the wand at the bottom, even with the brush out, when you sit it on the floor, is fairly high off from it, almost 1/4 of an inch, which indicates to me that there's a fairly good Airwatts at the end of it to be able to do that. And I have used it this way. It comes with a snap-in, let me see if I can get this in the picture. It comes with a snap-in dual brush thing that has slots in it. And I find that I don't know why it's designed this way, because when you use this, there's a brush in the front as you're pushing it, one in the back, and the slot where the air comes up through. And I've used this 2 ways that are different from this. What I will do is I will take, and it slides out here. I'll take and slide one of these brushes out so that this brush ends up in the back. So as it's being pushed, it rolls over whatever you're trying to vacuum. The brush stops it and it funnels it up into the vacuum cleaner. And that works pretty good, except for the fact that we have a round opening and a small slot for stuff to go up in. And that works, pretty good, because most stuff on the floor is really just, dust. But I do have wood pellets and sometimes a few other things. We live at the lake, so we're always tracking stuff in. I mean, it's a woodland area. So what I actually have been doing a lot of the time is just using this by itself. There are little feet on the side of it that keep it above the ground. And I find it makes a little squeaking noise sometime on the floor, but you have full access to the hole that goes up into the hose. And this really actually works good. Now, I've also found that the Airwatts are good enough with this unit that I am keeping an eye out for a longer tool here, because if something that would be longer would still work really good for this situation. Maybe not as good in a shop situation where you have a lot of heavier stuff that you're trying to pick up, but just for household use, something much larger would cover a longer area on the floor, and I think it would work just as good or better. And where do I store this when I'm not using it so that I don't lose it? It goes right inside with a vacuum bag. Okay, here's another little tip for anybody who has this vacuum, whether you're using it in the shop or in the house. This unit has a ring that can turn on the top here, and when you turn it one way, it opens up a slot. When you turn it the other way, it closes. And I don't know why they have this, because if I want less pulling power, less vacuum, I'll just turn it down to 1. So, why do I have to have it on 2 and then turn it down and turn this thing on? What's the point of having the air escaping from here anyway? I don't get it. This ring comes off. It's just a snap fit. And what I have done is I have taken and put a couple of layers of electrical tape over the slot just to close it up. And one of the reasons I did that is because when you're using this, it just turns on its own. You're using it and you'll find that it will be spun open. And then you'll close it, use it some more, and then you'll find that it will be spun open. So I have permanently blocked this air vent, which is an option. It's something you may want to do. So I'm not going to vacuum anything with this. I'm not even going to turn it on anymore. You can see those all over YouTube. People throw sawdust on the floor, vacuum it up, and say, hey, see, it vacuums sawdust. And of course, an overview of all the parts and everything. I just wanted to say that the Airwatts, that important number, are pretty good for this vacuum cleaner. Very good for a shop vac, and very good for a household vacuum. I would only buy this as a shop vac if I had a smaller shop and maybe did things like, if you've seen my videos, I make fishing lures. A lot of carving, a lot of sanding. There's not a whole lot of sawdust made. I have to vacuum the floor after. Stuff like that would be fine. But making furniture, doing other things, no. The bag would fill up, quite a ways, even with my dust collector. There's stuff all over the floor. And, it would be very good to attach this to a sander so that you could, suck up the dust that way. But it would be for small shop needs. As a household vac, the thing wheels good, and it has plenty of suction. And it's good for hard floors. I would not buy one of these if I had carpets. It's just, if they ever made a beater brush for the end of it, maybe, but I would not buy one of these for carpets. It does have, the brushes and the wands and all that stuff to make it, a complete vacuum cleaner. Like all my other Ego power tools, this one is really well made. I have the snowblower, I have a chainsaw, I have a lawnmower, and so forth. My first tool is from 2018, as is my first battery, and everything is still working and is not giving me any trouble at all. These are not your typical battery-operated plastic toys. These are real tools, and they're well put together. Otherwise, I would have stopped buying them. As usual, I have to leave you with a little note about the batteries. The tools work good. The batteries work good, surprisingly good, with as far as getting some use out of them, like to vacuum this entire floor. But there's still an unknown. This is still a science experiment. My batteries, I have had a lot of luck with them. They do have 3 or 5 year warranties. My large ones have a 5-year warranty for residential use. But this tool, if you have to replace this battery, suddenly becomes very expensive. If you don't have to replace it, it becomes very cost effective considering the performance compared to the convenience of having the battery. As usual, thank you for watching. Putting up with all the teachy stuff having to do with Airwatts and CFM and restrictions and so forth. Most of you know from watching my videos that I was a science teacher for way too long, and it's a bad habit. Okay, so you have a good day. Send your thoughts in the replies about what you think about this. And I realize, like I said, it's not for everybody. So, if you do have one, or you do get one, kind of like let me know at the bottom how it's going for you, or something that you've done or figured out that makes it better than it is. So long.